Yeah.
Andres, can you try again to share the screen?
Yeah, now it works. It will work. Thank you very much.
think we can start.
Well, welcome everybody to our seminar on Education Disrupted. I want to thank our friends at the OECD and my friend Andrea Schleicher for organizing this amazing global webinar. We have an all-star cast from all over the world. And we're going to divide this program today up into three basic parts. The first part is going to talk to experts about how they're experiencing this education crisis, how they're navigating it, and what are they learning and what can they share with others for how to navigate education in the age of COVID. Then we're going to hear from some young people who are both education entrepreneurs and students for how they're experiencing the crisis. And then we're going to hear from some education innovators on how they see education being reimagined after the coronavirus passes. God willing, that will be soon. But it's already obvious that some of the changes we've seen around distance learning, around transportation, around housing, they're going to trigger massive changes throughout our economies and societies that will have to be reflected in education as well. So that's the lineup. Andreas, did you want to say a few things before we start?
I don't think so at this point. I think
we'll jump right in then to our first panel, and
I think it's John Patry will start, and then it's me.
Then it's you. I'm sorry. Okay, John, my bad. Sorry.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to go after others. I'm a little bit shy on this global webinar to be the first speaker of any sort, but I'll just say a few high-level things. First of all, let me please thank Dr. Cheng Davis for your entrepreneurship and putting this together, making such an amazing group possible, and to Tom and Andreas and so many others for pulling together a fun group from whom I look forward to listening. And what a great thing it was to be in the chat and seeing Mumbai and Chile and Glasgow and Finland and Vienna and others just coming right through. It's so great to be here in this global connection with all of you. I thought I would just start with a couple of high-level observations. They're not yet, I think, strong claims because we're still in the midst, of course, of COVID, and it would be premature to say anything with too great definition. But just three things that I've observed, and this is in part from someone I've taught in the high school level and college and graduate school, and for a number of years was principal of a high school which had kids from all over the world, Phillips Academy in Andover, Mass. And so just really from observations as a teacher and a school leader, there are three things that I think will certainly be enduring out of the COVID crisis, no matter where we go from here. And like Tom, I would say, God willing, this will be shorter rather than longer, but I'm not so certain of that. The first is really to think about access and who has it and in what context. Not a surprise to anybody, but I'll start with an anecdote and move from there to some data. I was so struck by watching one of my two children, 14-year-old girl. She was enrolled in the Chicago public schools this spring. And she had an experience where it was actually pretty good education coming through her good Mac laptop using good Comcast Xfinity Wi-Fi, which is a strong connection, and her longtime digital skills. She actually had a pretty good educational experience this spring. But she was enrolled in the public schools where the teachers, who did an amazing job, by the way, they were just total heroes in pivoting immediately to this setting, that they had classes, maybe 30, 35 kids. There were usually about 10 kids who were enrolled as I would come in and observe her being in the class. And of course, some number of these kids did not join because they were being lazy, and that's their issues of motivation, no question. But for a number of these kids, it was simply that they didn't have a way to be part of Zoom or of the Google Classroom. And I do think that this has shone a new spotlight on issues of access and broadband around the world. So using a tiny bit of data in Chicago, a big city in the center of the United States, of course, we have found that about 1 in 5 kids didn't have broadband access during this period. They used to be able to go to a library or to a Starbucks or a McDonald's or a store that might have had Wi-Fi. Those were shut. So they literally had no way to participate in their classes. So set aside the kids not participating for all sorts of other reasons, but they literally didn't have the open schoolroom door. And then if you, of course, we're in a global setting here, at best, 55%, and it's probably closer to 50% of people around the world have broadband access. So to the extent that we're in a mode, which we are at the moment and will be again, I suspect, where we're thrown immediately into an all online learning, it is great for my daughter. In some ways, she did a wonderful job. She had great teachers. She was very supported. But if half the people can't access it, period, I think it prompts us to look at our broadband strategy, of course, and how we think about access to this technology. I think it's like electricity. It's like water, hot water. It's like heat. I think it should be seen as a public utility, and I think it should redouble our efforts to focus on that bit of access. As we all know, though, secondly, that's not enough to have access, of course, to the technology. The skills to learn in this way are completely different in many respects. To be able to learn in a Zoom classroom or in a Google classroom are different than in a physical classroom. And we somehow, in the field of education, persist pretty much everywhere around the world on a 19th century model that was designed to prepare people for this industrial world. I would look to the work of a certain Thomas Friedman on flat and fast, thinking about the ways in which the world has changed and how education must change with it. We just have not taken this seriously. And even the very best resource schools in the very wealthiest places, all through other schools, have really not done enough in this way. And we sort of amazingly still are preparing kids for a previous world. And I do think where we look at who's left behind and who's well prepared, all of those things come into play here around race and ethnicity and poverty, and they're just being reinforced in this time. So I think that the second point about innovation should be one that we need to take seriously in a way that we haven't. And I think the COVID crisis puts that on us to say, what actually are we preparing kids to do? Are we preparing them to be able to come into a room in physical space and to learn in a particular way, or for people to teach in that way? Or are we actually going to take seriously the need to prepare kids for a flat and fast world? Third and last point that I'll make, I think that a focus in this period on wellness has been very, very important. And this is, I'm going to give some America-specific data, United States-specific data, but it's, I suspect, true in many places around the world. One of the things that we've observed as teachers and as learners recently is the growth in anxiety and in stress, in things like suicidality among young people. That may be more of an American phenomenon than in some other places, but it's certainly a rising phenomenon. And the early studies, they were flash studies, but done during COVID, show that those kinds of trends continued upward during the COVID period. That there's one study I was looking at that was published in the Chronicle, the Active Mind study in April 2020 showed that 91% of kids that they talked to showed that their anxiety, their stress had gone up during the COVID period. We have to focus, I think, on the mental health and the social and emotional well-being of our kids in probably different ways. And we've needed to do this in any event. But I think the COVID crisis and the idea of kids being remote from other people, one another, the work of young people, as we all know, is actually largely to connect to one another, to be learning from one another and to have that kind of human contact. When that's taken away, we have to focus in a renewed way and in a particular way that I don't think we've yet figured out. So I want to cede the floor because there's so many great people to hear from, but I would just emphasize these three issues of access, of innovation, of wellness, and just making sure that we are doing that in an inclusive and equitable way. And as we seek to recover from this COVID crisis, let's actually build those kinds of educational institutions, both in cyberspace and in real space, that are going to serve all of our kids, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of wealth, and prepare people for this flat and fast world we're headed into. Thank you for the chance to say a few words, and I can't wait to hear what everybody else says.
John, that was fantastic. What a terrific introduction. Cheng, Andreas, do you want to speak to, would Cheng also like to say some words of introduction? She's been so important to organizing this as well.
Cheng?
Could you hear me, Andreas?
I couldn't, yeah. Otherwise, I thought that Cheng would be coming in. But let me just do my sort of a couple of remarks, and then I think Cheng, I'm sure, will come in. And I want to thank you, Tom, for hosting this. It's just fantastic to do this together with you. And I'm just going to put some data around John's words. In fact, these are difficult times, not just for education. If you think about it, we had, 1.5 billion students around the world locked out of schools. And one of the things they're going to take away from this is that learning is not a place, but an activity. And learning with technology simply must work in the future. For students who know how to learn, who enjoy learning, who found their way to digital resources, it's been a liberating and exciting time. but students who used to be spoon-fed by their teachers, who didn't have a support ecosystem around them, including technology, including parents, and who may have never liked school in the first place. They were just very badly left behind, and that's going to leave a trace. So this crisis has exposed the many inequalities in education. But, and I want to show you some data here, the crisis also brought people together in ways we've never seen before. We've seen remarkable commitment and resilience in this pandemic. In fact, in 36 countries that we surveyed in May, governments and teachers agreed that everybody did their best. It doesn't mean that things got perfect, but sort of everybody really put their efforts together. Close to 80% say that school lockdowns were designed in collaboration with teachers. 44% that public and private sectors work closely together. And it's so important because if you don't engage schools and teachers in the design of change, you know, they're never going to help you in implementing change. Now, the laws, regulations, institutions on which we tend to focus in policy, they are just, you know, the small visible tip of a huge iceberg. Now, the reason why it's just so hard to move education is the large, you know, invisible part of this iceberg under the waterline. That's about the interests, the beliefs, the fears of people who are involved, you know, teachers included. And that's where the unexpected collisions occur, because that part tends to evade the radar screen of public policy. So that explains why policymakers are rarely successful unless they build collective ownership for change, and unless they focus resources, build capacity, and create the right policy climate with accountability designed to encourage innovation rather than compliance. And this is exactly what happened in this crisis. So I think that's a very kind of positive development. Now, more than, you can see also here, more than half of the countries said governments and schools work together to find alternative arrangements, including, you know, digital learning. In 9% of the cases, parents took things into their hands. And clearly, many parents now appreciate a lot better what education is about and what teachers do. And this helped again to make education more of a whole of society project. But it's also clear, and I think John has made that case very, very well, that the alternative arrangements haven't worked for everyone. You know, if you look at Italy, it's 76 school days, it's over 40 days. And that's going to take its toll. As a rough guide, you can consider a lost school year equivalent to between 7 and 10% of lifetime earnings. This is a big chunk of our economy. And just about 40% of students were able to access most of the curriculum. And, you know, when curriculum time is more limited, you've got to make a lot more difficult choices on where to set priorities. And that's never easy, you know, it's about finding good responses, about adaptation, about implementation, or else you very quickly overburden teachers and schools. And that's also what we've seen in this crisis. What you can see here is that virtually all countries put academic learning first, but professional support for teachers, the social development and support for parents, actually, they're surprisingly close behind it. You know, when we do those surveys in normal times, it's all about academic learning. Now you suddenly see actually the social development, also student well-being, teacher well-being, they've actually become, you know, very, very important priorities, and how, you know, some of this will prevail for after the crisis. And, you know, real change often happens in deep crisis. I think we all know that. So I think this moment really holds the possibility that we don't just return to the inequitable status quo when things get back to normal. This pandemic has, you know, highly disruptive implications for schools, but it doesn't have predetermined implications. I think that's very important. It's going to be the nature of our collective responses to the disruptions that are going to, you know, determine how we will be affected by all of this. Look at the massive rise in online instructional resources during a few months, you know, more than during the last 10 years. And you can see in the orange bar, most of that online instruction is mediated by teachers. So again, technology has amplified, extended the reach of teaching, but not replaced teaching. Education is always a relational experience, not a transactional experience. I think the crisis is very amplified. And all this has come out of the blue, you know, in 2008, We studied this in detail, and we show here the share of teachers who use technology for classrooms. And you can see in some countries, like Finland, Romania, Croatia, Israel, technology use has more than doubled in a 5-year period. So a lot of things have happened in the last years already. But you can see that in many countries, technology use is still very limited. On average, you have about half of the teachers who are familiar and comfortable with using technology on a frequent basis. So that leaves a lot of students out of this equation, even where access to technology is good. And that's why many countries have invested massively in teacher capacity during this time. That's great, mostly through online resources for teacher development. Peer networks also played a really good role, but you can see that teachers were more skeptical when it comes to the collaborative culture at the school. I think there's a lot more work needed here. Almost a quarter of teachers were left entirely on their own devices. Well, but let's look to a little bit to the future. It's a lot harder to reopen schools than to close them. I think we have learned that lesson as well. And in a sense, it's great to see that half of the countries now have a date for reopening schools, and another quarter is pretty close to the strategy. Just 4% of countries will not open their schools in this academic year. So you can see a lot of momentum. But obviously, reconciling health and education is going to remain a very tough kind of balancing act. Now, it's true that the medical benefits of school closures are actually quite small to what you can achieve through household quarantine or social distancing at work. So don't overestimate the benefits of school closures. But you talk still about 15% here. And that's why, most countries have put quite extensive health measures into this. You see that here into the reopening plans. Virtually all countries are training students and staff on hygiene, on putting social distancing protocols in place, have also planned to close common spaces. And that again shows, how important frontline capacity is. Suddenly you need school leaders who are able to proceed, to take, measures when staff are unwell or students are unwell. They need to cope with the virus. They need to recognize, understand risks. We've always, treated teachers and school leaders as the last wheel of a big bureaucracy. And suddenly, they are the owners of those kinds of processes. So you really rely on this. And beyond the immediate medical context, the crisis has also elevated the need to attend to the well-being of students. John has just said this. And you can see actually that's become a big priority in most countries. But at the end, you can see in the orange bar, very few countries are going to hire additional school doctors, nurses, or psychologists. Basically, that means that teachers themselves will need to grow beyond their role of instructors. They need to become great coaches, great mentors, great facilitators, great social workers, if they want to rise to the challenge. You're not going to see a lot of other people added to the system. The nature and role of teaching is going to be evolving. In most countries, schools are going to open progressively with variations by grade, by geography, and where schools have to make choices. Learning on premises is getting priority first for struggling students. Many countries are opening their schools first to students from disadvantage who lack the supportive infrastructure at home. For students at key stages of their schooling trajectory, students nearing exams, and also for students with a lot of practical training. Now, academic learning works quite well remotely, but when you think about career and technical training, that's a lot harder. In just 1 of 5 cases, do we expect a return to business as usual? Isn't that interesting? At least that's the impression now. So most countries are going to use the spaces, the time, the people, the technology quite differently. You can see hybrid models of learning in over half of the countries becoming the new normal. Nobody would have predicted that 5 months before. Basically, the integration of technology and in-person learning, not seeing them as alternatives. But the infrastructure for effective online learning is still quite patchy. Here you see a picture of G20 countries. In Singapore or the coastal areas of China, you have 9 out of 10 schools fully equipped with a functioning online learning platform. But in Argentina, that's less than 1 in 5. And more importantly, when you look at whether teachers have the technical and pedagogical skills to actually integrate technology and instruction, you can see the challenges are even greater. Even in a high-tech country like Japan, they are the last in the list. The majority of teachers are not ready for the time in which we live. That's why e-learning readiness is so key to the reopening. As you can see, your countries are working targeted training, not just for also TV and radio delivery. I'm sure from Tiana, we're going to hear in a moment how effective that has been in the context of Spain. The question I want to raise, and I think that's very important, what kind of pedagogy are we going to see when schools reopen? If physical distancing makes things like collaborative learning, active learning, project-based learning so difficult, then we need to think a lot harder how we complement the kind of school-based learning that is still possible in the virus with kind of online learning that does all this rest. Otherwise, we could see schooling going back by 20 years in terms of pedagogical innovation, becoming a much more stifled and rigid kind of environment. I think that's a very important point. And these are not just words. What I'm saying here, I'm concluding with a slide from our Thales data, which show you actually the gaps between, teacher capacity today and the kind of learning environments that you want to see now and in the future. You can see here, teachers are quite comfortable with delivering an instruction and managing classrooms. But when it comes to cognitive activation, enhanced activities, the gray bars are getting much shorter. You see here, less than 60% of teachers say they frequently give students tasks that require them to think critically. Less than 50% say they frequently let students solve complex tasks, and less than 40% use tasks for which there is no obvious solution. And less than 30% of teachers give students tasks that take more than 1 week to complete. And this is exactly the kind of independent and self-organized learning that is what this pandemic calling for and requires. In a way, our education system, I figured out how to educate second-class robots. People are very good to repeat what we tell them. But the advent of artificial intelligence, amplified by the pandemic, is going to push us to think much harder of what it means to be human and how do we complement, not substitute, the artificial intelligence we've created in our computers. So lots of things to do if we want to educate the next generation for their future rather than for our past. Thank you, Tom.
Andreas, that was wonderful. And John, thank you. Those were two just great introductions. I don't know, did Cheng want to say anything before we move on to the panel? Maybe she can't hear. So let's go to our first panel if we could. We have three fantastic really interlocutors here. Alejandro Tiana, who is the State Secretary for Education for Spain, Earl Phelan, who is the CEO and founder of Phelan Leadership Academies, and Franco Amoso, who is the CEO of Teach for Peru. And I'm just going to ask the three of you to each take a few minutes to talk about how you have responded in each of your own systems to the COVID-19 crisis. What have you learned, and what's the most important thing that you want to share with others? And Alejandro, if you would kick us off, you've done such a renowned job for building this education transition in the middle of a pandemic in Spain. Lead us off, if you would.
Hello. Hello, can you?
We hear you.
I guess, can you hear me?
Go right ahead.
So in Spain, as in many other countries, the 14th of March, we close the face-to-face educational activities. Not educational activity, but face-to-face educational activities. Excuse me. Okay.
There you go.
So schools, teachers, and students, they had to shift very quickly and in depth all the activities they were used to, moving to distance, remote, as Andrea said, online learning. But several problems did arise, and I would like to mention at least three of them. The first, that even if digitalization of education in Spain was already in process, our education system was neither adapted nor used to only use digital procedures. So we were using more and more, as you can see from Thales and so on. Our teachers were used to use digital media at school, but well, the system was not used to only use that. Second, Spain, probably some of you would know, is a highly decentralized, not a federal country, but a federal-like country. And those processes were conducted in different ways and different speeds in different regions. And so there was a mosaic of situations we should hand together. And the third one is that we were a bit aware before that a digital gap existed, but we realize its really dimension at this very moment. And several thousands of students found difficulties for getting engaged in education and learning. As Andreas said, it did happen in some other countries. So we should act very quickly for solving or try to solve at least these problems. First, the ministry should cooperate with the regional ministries to share materials, platforms, and digital resources. And I think that we were successful to build very quickly a website based on previous initiatives and materials developed by the ministry and by the regions. And I think a wide website was offered to teachers, schools, educational authorities, and so on, to use them as part of the activities they were forced to develop. Second, we should cooperate with the ICT industry and the communication companies to provide students with tools and connectivity. A great effort was done, reaching more than 25,000 students in just a couple of weeks. And we should cooperate with private industry, with private communication companies and so on. And that proved very, very interesting and helpful. And on the third place, we should cooperate with the public TV channels, preparing a full program TV broadcast for students having more problems for connection, not only focusing on digital connectivity, which was, of course, outstanding, but for other students without that possibilities and connections. And in a couple of weeks, we organize a full program of 5 hours, 5 days a week for students from 6 to 16, lasting for 3 months in coordination with a number of private contents providers, the TV, but also YouTubers, editorial companies, and so on, that work for free with the ministry and with the TV channel to provide that. So we, in general terms, we are satisfied with the work done, but we need now to analyze it carefully in order to get lessons from that experience. We are fully aware that some of the good practices need to be incorporated to our education system, and it is time now to work in it. We have to decide what is valuable enough, worthy enough to get it included in the normal operation of the education systems. Thanks for this opportunity.
Wonderful, Alejandro. Thank you very much. I want to ask Earl Phelan next. Earl, you've got about 10,000 students, I was reading, in 20 schools operating throughout the U.S.
Yes.
Tell us about the challenges you faced, what you've learned, the obstacles you've overcome, and what you could share with others.
Yeah, we had, thank you, Tom. We had 3 major challenges when this crisis hit. First and foremost, because school is such a place of nutrition for our scholars, we had to make sure that our children didn't go hungry. And the state and the federal government they were great to us. They allowed us to serve meals not only to our scholars on a grab and go basis, but also to their older siblings and to their parents. And so that was very fair, very equitable, and we were blessed to be able to do that for our scholars, and would continue to do it during the summer, even though usually we wouldn't do it. The second thing we had to address was the academic piece. We all know the impact.
Can I stop you there for a second? How did you do that? How did you deliver food, to families and students? How did you actually do that?
So we set up a grab and go drive-through. And so our parents were, some of our schools did it once a week, some of our schools did it kind of Monday and Friday, but we set up a grab and go. You'd come through, you tell us how many family members you needed it for, and we gave you X number of boxes, and you had it for the whole week, and that would carry you through till next Monday. The second thing we had to worry about, or we thought we had to worry about, was the academic piece. We were worried about the learning loss our scholars were getting. We did what a lot of other people in the United States did, or a lot of districts. We tried to go out and get iPads for our young scholars and Chromebooks for our little bit older scholars, but those were on very big back order. And so we had to set up a e-learning site, because we didn't want to just do paper packets. That's not instruction. And it doesn't give you a chance for feedback. So we set up a e-learning site. Our teachers were incredible. They volunteered, and we tried to set up 400 videos. So 30 standards or 30 skills in English language arts, 30 skills in math, and we did it all for all 60 standards for grades 1, 2, all the way through, so that our scholars could get on a phone, or they could get on a computer or a device at home and still get some type of instruction, not interactive, but still get some type of instruction. So that was step 2. Our teachers then were also calling, and our teachers started. One of the things I've loved about, and this has been a terrible time, but one of the things I've loved is our teachers have been forced to partner with parents in a deeper way than I've seen around the country. And just making those calls and having comfort and being collaborative, not antagonistic, but being collaborative, because maybe the family needs something, and for us to serve our children, we need the parents to be supportive and answer the phone and allow their child to talk. And just love to see how that collaboration has elevated and would come together in support of our common mission, which is our children. Finally, when the devices arrived, we had to set up a lot of protections to make sure that sending 10,000 devices into homes, we didn't want sites to be used for bad things. We wanted to make it very easy and user-friendly. We wanted to be able to kill the device if somebody thought, hey, I can take this, I'm an older sibling, or I'm a whatever boy, my mother's boyfriend, I'm gonna take this and sell it. We kind of had to squash that right away and say, that's not what we're gonna do with this. The thing that we really miss, Tom, is how much, and I know schools, it's a place, it's also home for many children. And if it's not home, it's certainly an extension of home, and a critical extension of home. And I missed it, and my team fortunately responded, but how much of the social emotional support, the love, the high five, the whatever, just the attaboy type of feedback, it was such an important link that is missed for our kids. And our kids really struggled in the first few weeks until we realized we've got to support the social emotional needs in this virtual almost equally, or maybe even ahead of worrying about the academic piece. And so those were some of the things that we kind of took from the experience.
Just a quick question. How did you address the social emotional needs? How did you try to address that challenge?
Well, our teachers got real creative. So they created these baby shark videos. So that became one of the very popular activities for our scholars to do. And then there were yoga clubs that they had. There were dance offs they had. Some teachers would send pizza out. We had a local pizza place that was great and send out pizzas. We had virtual pizza parties. So they just really, the creativity, once we knew that was the issue, just kind of, we have 850 staff members. And so people just came up with incredible ideas. And then we shared. We were getting together twice a week to say what's working in Texas, what's working in Indiana. And folks just kind of continued to build on those ideas. And so that was a very, very important kind of pivot for us.
Wonderful, enormously helpful. Really, really appreciate that.
Thanks, Tom.
We're going to go to Peru and Franco, teach for Peru. Tell us how you've met this challenge, and what have been some of your innovations, and what would you like to share with others?
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Andreas, for the invitation. I think our story, I'd say it's a story of collective leadership, because what we did was trying to get together with our allies at all levels of the system and try to generate solutions together. For a little bit of context, in our case, as in many developing countries, 95% of students in rural areas do not have internet. Also, there was a migration from students that were in private education, but not of such quality, to average public education. We had 100,000 students migrating.
Wow.
And so,
can I ask you a question? Why was it? Why were people leaving private schools to join the public system?
So in our country, you have a problem that a private education, school private education is actually specifically in the capital worse than public education.
Interesting.
And so when the crisis hit, it was evident that they couldn't react.
Wow.
And at the same time, the government was setting up the whole strategy of Aprendo en Casa, which is I learn from home with all, like a TV and radio strategy and online strategy. And so parents were saying, I need to go to where the education is going to continue. And so I think a large idea for us at Enseña Peru was the different layers of change. And so at the beginning, the first layer of change was by force of emergence and self-organizing of people in the system, then followed by some systems and legislation. And what remains to be seen is this is going to be transformed into a new culture of education for Peru. So I think it unfolded in those three areas. And also what came with that was that we went to virtual, or we went to distance education at the beginning with all the paradigms of the system. And what I mean by that, for example, is bureaucracy was also carried to distance education and to virtual media. An example of that, for example, in the first 2 to 3 weeks, teachers were asked to give reports on a daily basis about what was happening with students, which many teachers thought that it wasn't necessary. Now because it robbed time from key activities such as, talking with kids and giving feedback and such. And so now our legislation has adapted so that they do not report on a daily basis, they report on a monthly basis, which we think is much more reasonable. And talking about a couple of ways in which we contributed, we partnered, the ministry led a campaign, nationwide campaign to continue on the service, which is called Aprendo en Casa. We partnered with them to produce, starting from the second season, all the sessions from 5th primary grade to 12th grade that will be broadcasted, especially for kids that don't have access to internet. This means in television and in radio, and the government did a fantastic job in partnering with local radios. You think about a student, the radio is the #1 medium that is in their households. And so with that, we reached between 1.5 and 2 million students across the country. And many of our graduates were, from the leadership programs that we run, were building these sessions with the ministry. And then they went to this incredible production team that aired them. The second was part of our leadership programs, specifically the ones regarding competency-based education. We shared them with local leaders nationwide. So we launched this training, but not for teachers, principals, but for the local policymaker that sets so much of the culture of how education is run in each district. And with that, we reached about 30% of the system. Also, we gathered to gather data about what families were feeling with this whole change. And so together with the ministry and with other organizations, we mobilized around 1,000 volunteers so they could reach out to 15,000 families in order to see how they were dealing with distance education, emotional well-being, possible problems. And then we gathered that data, the ministry processed it and used it in their policymaking. The other thing that we did was, I call it like agile policy briefs. And we gathered information from what was going on in the field very agilely. And we sent that to the vice minister or to the authorities. And that, coupled with very agile guidelines that nurture creativity in teachers, I think is important for us. Moving forward, I think that the incredible importance of mid-leadership, regional leadership, local leadership, tremendously important for implementation. I think another lesson learned was that now people have the mindset that you can connect, like have a human connection, #1. and that you can also have quality training in our country like ours, where every single or almost every single official event of teacher training is in person. And now I think that there is an enormous opportunity with that shift in mindset. And I think that we need to hold, when moving forward, I think it's important to hold fundamental aspects of the student experience that have changed. So I'll end with this. With the previous model, there were thousands of students that were in the back of that classroom, not having the chance to speak with their teachers once in all the years of education, that now are, having at least some one-to-one conversations with their teachers. And on the other side, the other fundamental shift of time is on teachers. Teachers were supposed to be hours, dictating classes with groups of 15, 20, 30 kids. And now their time allocation has shifted in a pretty fundamental way. And I think hopefully we can sustain that into the future.
That's just fascinating. Thank you, Franco, so much. We're now going to keep moving around the world. We're going to listen to 4 students or student educators to hear about their experience, really just how they too are experiencing this crisis from the point of view of young students. And I'm going to begin with Alice Amiga. Alice, would you join us from Cambridge? And just a quick introduction, Alice, if you do, of what you're studying and where you're from, and how have you navigated this coronavirus education transition?
Yeah, I think it has been a moment to pause and reflect on my own trajectory into education and how being a rural student and how this would have affected me.
Because you're at Cambridge and you're studying education.
Yes, I'm in Cambridge and I'm doing a PhD in education currently. My focus is on technical vocational education.
And you're originally from Ghana?
From Ghana, yes. Yeah, so that has been a moment, or the pandemic has been a moment to pause and reflect on my own journey as a student from a disadvantaged background and how this would have been for me. And being a student and an early researcher, that draw in some curiosity to find out what rural students in particular are doing currently and how they are adapting to the situation. And so I preliminary interviewed or spoke to a number of students back in Ghana, even though I'm not there currently. And some of the ways they are adapting to the situation struck me very much. And one student told me he may not have access to TV, to internet connection, and so decided to move from the village to stay with an auntie in Accra, the capital, where there's internet access and he could continue with his education. Another young lady told me, I don't think I can get access to internet connectivity in the morning. So I wake up at dawn to read, to get quality access, and also to submit my assignments. And in my context, this shows their resilience, and this shows some sort of engagement and motivation to learn. And I was very proud of my rural students that I spoke to. That notwithstanding, I also currently join a number of young people who have seen the situation and have developed an initiative where we are at the early stages designing the project called Learn IT, where we are hoping at the end of the pandemic, hopefully, we'll partner with deprived communities in slums, in shanty towns in Accra, in rural Ghana, to provide ICT support for ICT teachers in these schools, like laptop, like computer accessories to facilitate digital learning and to help the government bridge the gap. So currently what the government had done, which I believe is brilliant, is to engage with the Ghana Education Service and the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation to bring in radio and TV learning opportunities for students. And I believe that will help the rural students access online learning. So basically that has been some sort of engagement in my context, and hoping for the pandemic to be over to be on the field to run the project that I'm currently sort of consulting for. So yeah.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. Really, really appreciate hearing from that. I'm going to move now to Christopher Rim, who's the founder and CEO of Command Education, and headquartered in New York City. And Christopher, if you could pop up there on the screen somewhere. And, you know, you're in the testing business and getting kids from high school into colleges. How is that being impacted by the coronavirus crisis?
Exactly. So thank you, Thomas. So essentially right now, I work with a lot of students, not only in New York City, even though we're based here, but around the world. And there's a lot of confusion. A lot of schools, a lot of colleges are saying that SAT, ACT, and subject tests are now optional. And they're doing that in order to really open up the applicant pool. They don't want students to feel as stressed. But in reality, they're still considering the scores for the most part.
Interesting.
So just because you say testing is optional does not mean it's not going to be considered. There's a difference between test optional and test blind. So to give you an example, Yale and MIT are two of the top schools that have said that they will go test blind for the SAT-2 subject test, which means even if you take it and you score perfect or near perfect, they will not take that into consideration when evaluating your application. All the other schools will do it. So if you don't take it, you're already at a disadvantage. If someone else from your class or from your community or your school takes the test and scores pretty well or perfect on it, that person's gonna have a more favorable application. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. People don't know what test optional means. They're gonna not take the exam. So I think making sure that students and families are aware that you should still be taking these tests until they all go test blind is really top of mind and important for us.
And what would you say is the biggest question parents are asking you now?
So right now, one of the biggest questions parents are asking is how will this really have an impact for current, rising seniors, right? Because a lot of students that I work with who are international, I would say every single student, 100% of them are taking gap years. So if they're taking a gap year, they're essentially taking spots away from the current students who will be applying to college this fall, which means
just on that question. So if I have a son or daughter who's a senior in high school now, rising senior, going to be a senior next year, they're going to be applying to college. Meanwhile, all these other kids have taken gap years. Isn't there going to be a giant pileup in terms of admissions?
Exactly, and that's why it's going to be harder than ever for this next cycle, next group of students who will be rising seniors this fall to get into top schools. That's what I think. But also, on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of students asking for more financial aid. I mean, there was a piece in the New York Times just yesterday just talking about how colleges are being more flexible with their tuition. If you ask that you need 25, 30, 40% off, they're more than willing to be a little bit flexible this cycle around. So we don't know what it's gonna look like. There might be more students, less students, it might balance out. But I just know because of so many students taking gap years that the following year might be a little bit more challenging. But also, if there's a travel ban and students can't come into the country, that might level the playing field and it might just be the same. But we have no idea what's actually gonna happen. But based on the information that we do know, we're gonna play it safe and assume that it's going to be harder to get into college this next cycle.
Christopher, thank you very much. Really appreciate those insights.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. I'm gonna go now to Aringe Igiraneza, who is an EdTech entrepreneur and wins my award for the day for being the founder of the company with the most interesting name, Ogenius Panda. And so, Aringe, are you on here somewhere?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. Ogenius actually stands for excitement. We picked the name because our vision is to create excitement around learning journey and also help in nurturing future geniuses for the world.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit about the company and very quickly your background and just so people know where you're coming from.
All right. I'm Origene Igiraneza. I'm from Rwanda. It's in Africa, Central Africa. And what we do, represent a company called Ogenius Priority, which is a software company that has created an educational platform called Ogenius Panda. And the reason why we created Ogenius Panda was to address some of the issues that we find around, it's actually the issues we faced when we were studying back in high school as well as at university, which goes around the scarcity of laboratory equipment as well as the digital content. So current statistics in Rwanda show that 78.4% of secondary schools don't have access to laboratories, yet they are teaching sciences. And this is not only Rwandan problem, because according to UN report of last year, it showed that the world largest population, which is young people, millennials, 3.5 billion of them, 78% of them believe in sciences, majorly from developing countries, but they are being taught theoretically. And for us at Ogenius, what we've done is to innovate a way of teaching and learning sciences in much more easy and engaging way, whereby we create a highly interactive content, which is made of simulation to ease students have access and enjoy the journey of accessing laboratory experiments just using their computers or mobile phones.
So what's the biggest thing you learned from this crisis that you could share with us? What's the biggest insight you've taken?
So what we've seen dealing this crisis, we've seen that actually there was a rise of accessibility of our platform, whereby the number of users have grown drastically and the activities have grown around 1,151%. That makes a huge difference from what we've been doing before. Counting that before the pandemic, we were serving only 9 schools, but currently we have hit 3 digits with more than 100 schools registered in the platform. And some of the things that we've done, thanks to the Ministry of Education, Rwanda Education Board, and MasterCard Foundation, as well as UNESCO, is to zero-rate the platform so that users, even from those in underprivileged areas, were able to use the platform without necessarily thinking about their internet bundles. And we have also managed to to open the platform to many students where they could access the content for free, as well as working with the government in the distribution. So basically, those are the main things that we've seen and we've done around, and we've managed to get thousands of students online to keep up their studies, given that schools has been closed and are still under lockdown, shutdown until September this year.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic to hear from you, and I love hearing about this innovation. I think a lot of people on this call will want to hear more about it and go to your site. Thank you very much. I'm going to go now to Abdurrahmane Diallo, who's from New York City, in the Bronx, and was a Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua in China. And Abdurrahmane, can you tell us what you've been working on and how you've been navigating this coronavirus around your education projects?
All right. Hey, thank you, Thomas, and thank you, everyone here. So, yeah, as you guys know, New York City is one of the cities that was really hit by this pandemic for the past 4 months. Now, other cities in the country kind of like testing what we have been through for the past 4 months. Hopefully, will not continue. But you know, education was disrupted and moved remotely, and especially in the Bronx, from the Bronx here. The South Bronx is the poorest congressional district in the country. So during this pandemic, the inequality in the financial inequality also reflects in the educational inequality. And we have many kids, many families, underprivileged families from the South Bronx that I think John mentioned in the previous, that didn't have access to internet, that didn't have laptop, that didn't have computer at home. And that was a big problem in the South Bronx here. And this is New York City, one of the most powerful city in the country, in the world. But there was many kids that didn't have access to internet, that didn't have computer at home. And it took a while for those kids to stabilize and have those access. And there was another problem, especially with the immigrant community. If you have a kid that was 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, and this kid couldn't, help themselves do homework. And there was many families that didn't go to school and they have to help their kids. And that was a big problem that we face with many immigrant community here. So one of the things we did was we created.
Can I stop you? Explain that a little bit. You said the families, the parents couldn't help the kids because they had to work or because they were home. Explain that just a little bit.
When the education moved remotely, and student, there was online learning through Zoom or Google Classroom, and you have to kind of assist your children. If they're younger children, you have to assist them through this thing. There are many families, there are many parents, they didn't went to school, so they didn't know how to assist them. Gotcha. And that was a big problem that we were facing. And some of the NYC education department was trying to translate some of these languages into French or Spanish and stuff. But many of these community, not necessarily they speak French. They speak their own local languages, which is not written sometimes, which is oral, and it's hard to find translation. And that was a thing that we're facing here with many underprivileged community in the South Bronx. So what we did from the Guinean Succeed in America is an educational not-for-profit operating here in New York City. What we did, we launched an online tutoring platform to help these kids. So we matched them with someone that speaks their own language to volunteer 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week to help these kids. But I think that's one of the main problems that New York City department need to find a solution for it. And also, John mentioned, Andrea mentioned at the beginning of the pandemic, the department was, everybody was focusing on the learning, but there was a lot of other effect that was affecting. For, as I said, South Bronx is really poor. There was food insecurity, and people was losing their job, and that was a big thing. So we also jump into, as a ICNA, we jump in to help serve 600 family a week with food and halal food or Muslim people, especially in the Ramadan. We help serve a lot of food. So there was a lot of challenges, but the community came together and to kind of like help each other, one another.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your work and thanks for sharing that. Really, really appreciate it. We're going to shift now to, we're running a little over, but I know people are still interested. So we're going to shift now to talk about where we go the morning after, God willing, the morning after a vaccine, how this crisis will reshape education and how the needs of a fast and technologically rapidly accelerating world will also reshape education. I'm going to begin with Orly Friedman from the Redbridge School opening in San Francisco. Orly.
Thank you. So Redbridge Education is something that I've been working on for the last few years. And since COVID-19 and since shelter in place, what we're working on really has become even more important. So Redbridge Education is designing a new model of learning where we teach students to set goals, reflect, and take ownership of their learning, all in order to develop a sense of agency in every child. And I think for parents and teachers at home, students who can actually drive their own learning is something that's even more valuable these days. And so if you think about the traditional school model, the unstated design principle is really compliance. And compliance is designed in the way that students are asked to move through the space, the way that they interact with a teacher, the way they're graded, the way they're grouped and promoted. And what we're doing at Redbridge is taking all of those systems of school, student grouping, student grading, and redesigning them to support students taking ownership of their learning and developing a sense of agency. So one example of that is in the way that we group and promote students. In the traditional model, students are grouped by age in grade levels. And as long as you are reasonably well behaved and are in attendance for 180 days, you move to the next grade level the next year. Only 2% of students in the US are held back each year, which is much lower than the number of students who are actually meeting grade level standards. And it's a very passive process. So at RedBridge, what we've done is we group students by autonomy level. An autonomy level is based on work habits, things like time management, focus, initiative, collaboration, the actual skills of learning itself. And so students are promoted when they consistently demonstrate those learning skills. So the focus of the school experience really becomes about teaching the students skills of how to learn, in addition to the content of learning. So that's one of the ways that we have redesigned our model to be about developing a sense of agency in students and teaching them to take ownership of their learning.
Orly, thank you. Wonderful introduction to RedBridge. And if people want to read about it, where can they go?
Our website is redbridgesf.org. We're opening a demonstration school in San Francisco this September.
Terrific. Thank you so much. We're going to move to Siva Kumari, the Director General of the IB program, International Baccalaureate in Switzerland. And Siva, where is the IB program going to go after coronavirus?
Yes, great, Tom. Thanks for asking that question, and thanks to you and Andreas for the invitation. Well, we're thinking about all of that as we speak, actually, because we're designing our strategy for the next 10 years of the IB. And just as a starting point, the IB works across the world in the most privileged of schools and equally with schools that are not privileged at all. So it was great to hear the experimentation going on about labs, et cetera, that the previous speaker spoke about. And our goal is to enable the implementation of excellent learning and teaching in all these very different settings. And this pandemic has reinforced for us that the upholding of high standards is what we need to continue to do. One of the first decisions I had to make when this pandemic occurred is, as a Director General, I had to send a notice out that we're canceling exams worldwide, and that has not been done in 50 years. But based on that experience and where we are now, I think I would recommend that we focus on 3 issues in a post-COVID world. First is about learning in the 4th Industrial Revolution and enabling great learners. The second is shifting and thinking of teachers as very important professionals, contributing to the future well-being of the economy of the country and the competitiveness of the country. And third is we talk a little bit about assessment and the intersect between artificial intelligence and the age of the internet and where we want to take the learner. So let me just focus on learning in the 4th Industrial Revolution world for a bit and how we enable great learners. First, I think we should be designing learning for today, and we shouldn't be talking about a tomorrow because that just postpones the problem. And what does focus on today mean? It means it's not just content. And as Orly talked about, it is about the skills and attributes needed to enable great learning. It's not just about knowledge acquisition. So I think what we are going to be focusing on is age-appropriate learning and designing learning environments and policies that engage and evaluate the passion of students at all levels. And how do you bring that passion into education? How do you make the student believe they're working on what they're interested in while learning all of the content and the skills they need to learn to be great humanitarians in the world of tomorrow? We should also not fall into the trap of treating these children as guinea pigs for assessment data. We need to move to learning conditions that use current technologies in powerful ways to assist the learner in developing themselves as a better learner. This means we will have to have explicit conversations with children, but also parents about the knowledge, skills, and attributes that are needed for the 4th Industrial Revolution, not the age when the parent went to school. So I see parental education as an important part of solving this problem. We should also ask ourselves now, how could technology be better used post-COVID to address the loss of learning that is disparate and based on the socioeconomic status that the child is born into? The loss of learning that students are experiencing, and Andreas talked about the numbers, now based on their socioeconomic status, will have a disastrous impact on their future education and therefore their earnings in future years. So this is something we should seriously be thinking about. Before, we saw schools as places that protected your children, and now we see them as virus-spreading buildings. Parents in real time are experiencing either seriously good or seriously bad teaching in their own homes, and some parents are not able to distinguish between the two. So we have now firmly established that schools are not the only place where learning can occur. Now is the time, therefore, to conceive new forms of schooling and extend beyond the brick and mortar. We want learners to be able to learn with and via technology, but we also want learners to learn with critical thinking skills. So we don't want them to only become consumers of technology or servants to algorithm. We want our students to instead use technology for the betterment of humanity. And we do this now in the IB. We combine the natural curiosity of the child with higher order evaluations and ask them to take on projects that matter to them and that should matter to the world. So we prepare them in a holistic way so that their minds and hearts are engaged in making the change that they want to see in the world. Let me shift to teachers as professionals. I think policymakers really need to abandon short-term politics and focus on how teachers are the key to any country's competitiveness. It's really simple. The country's economic competitiveness depends on how it's educating its current K-12 generations. These are the generations that teachers nurture. Teachers will need to be enabled with the power of technology to help them with diagnostic data to power better learners. That the ambition of teachers entering the profession to teach humans are fulfilled in the working conditions they're given. Much like the doctor who enters his or her profession to heal is provided with tons of tools and diagnostic data to treat. Teachers should be aided with a lot more tools so they're not overburdened with so many tasks. Professional development can help teachers make this change. Technology can be used to enable content acquisition, while teacher serves the role in the classroom that no AI can, provide that human touch, and serve as the adult who encourages the child to be the best learner that they can be. And finally, I'll end with assessment. Assessment, I think, far too often becomes a tool for ranking countries or local schools or local teachers, but we need to refocus. First, how do we use assessment in creative ways to develop a human being who wants to actively change the world? We should not just see this child as a test taker, but we should design assessment for learning that builds on the natural strengths of the child and allows them to improve their weaknesses as well. AI and the exploding world of technology investments, I think, can provide answers here as we design systems to assist the child in developing their knowledge, the skills, and the attributes needed for the world of today. So let's move to a richer set of assessments so that students can demonstrate their learning in multiple ways, in ways of the modern world, through portfolios, through problem solving, not just locally, but internationally, working together, working collaboratively across the internet, and then give teachers a lot more assessment tools in their hands and train them on those assessment tools. And we should be learning from learning sciences and treat this as a real profession. Let's move this profession to what it is. It's a profession that builds the next generation of any country. And we should be deeply invested in how this profession works, given that they nurture 12 years of our children's most formative years. As far as, sorry,
we gotta move on. I'm sorry. Okay, but thank you very much. It was
thank you.
Introduction. Really appreciate it. I want to bring in Olli-Pekka Hänninen, the former Minister of Education of Finland, which has been such an education entrepreneur and innovator over the years under Olli's leadership. And he was Minister of Education when he was 12 years old or something like that, one of the youngest ever. Oh, there you are. Olli, where do you think education is going to go as a result of this incredible global pandemic we're experiencing?
Thank you, Tom. That's a very good question. And to me, the COVID-19, it has been a kind of the same thing as taking an X-ray picture, that you see things that have been there before, but you see them more clearly. And there are kind of three things that I would like to take up, that what we are seeing in Finland more clearly. The first one is that we're talking about education systems, but do we really understand that? What does it mean that it's a system? It means that the different parts of the system are interrelated to each other, and they are interdependent of each other. And that means that it's not enough that we have some good schools, but we need to create the system so that all the schools are good schools. And then you need the kind of interaction and communication from the teacher level to the school level to the education provider level, including the parents to the national level, so that you kind of live and breathe the same reality of learning. And that creates the trust in the system, which is so essential in crisis situation. And that trust enables the system to adapt and learn. And I think that's very, very important, that we get the kind of flexibility and adaptability of the system to cope with unexpected situations. So that's my kind of first observation. The second one is something that John said in the beginning about the kind of interconnection between learning and wellness, learning and well-being. And we kind of created our societies so that we are kind of seeing those two as kind of separate systems. But if the well-being of a student is not there, the learning won't happen. And we have to be able to integrate those systems, better taking into use the needs of individual students. And that is kind of something that I think we have seen interesting phenomena during the COVID-19. We have seen, of course, the kind of increased risk of dropout with students that have social problems or mental health problems as a background. And that is definitely something that we have to tackle more carefully. But we have also seen with the distance learning phase, students who have flourished in a way that they have never done before. And it's the parents, the students themselves, the teachers are saying the same thing. And quite often, there are also kind of some sensory defensiveness or Asperger, autism spectrum issues or bullying or something like that, that has hindered the learning happening in school for these children. And the answer is not that we continue with distance learning with these children, but the answer is that we have to change the way we run our schools, better taking into consideration their personal needs. So it's a kind of building more personal learning paths, taking into consideration each child's needs and starting points is something that we need to do better. And my third point is the fact that the teacher identity must be even stronger than it's today, an identity of a developer and innovator, that they take the responsibility of learning. And it's not something that they do alone, but they do it together with other teachers, with principals and the parents. We noticed that if there's a good communication between the school, the teacher and the parents before the crisis, everything went fine during the distance learning phase. But if that kind of good connection and trust was missing, then there were friction and disagreements about what the school is about and what the distance learning teachers' pedagogical methods are all about. So these are the three lessons that we try to do better in the future.
Terrific. That the importance of trust. One of my teachers and friends, Dov Seidman, always likes to say that trust is the only legal performance enhancing drug. Okay, when there's trust in the room, good things happen. When there's trust not in the room, and especially in a crisis. Thank you very much. We're going to close with Rod Page. Rod, you're going to bat cleanup. it's appropriate. You've done everything: football coach, school superintendent, secretary of education, college president. What does it all look like to you? How do you see education emerging from this crisis going forward?
One thing I understand now is we're in a major transition. The COVID-19 situation has really transformed much of what we do, both policy-wise and also teaching-wise. I'm very concerned about, through policies, the new thinking about how we organize ourselves and how we work. Our old system was based on school rules, regulations, procedures, and school protocols, all of which are going to have to be rethought. But what concerns me most is a teaching and learning situation, which I think is going to require major transformation. Not just change, major transformation. One of the things that's going to involve more home activity and how individual students react at home and the kind of support they get at home. Many students, we already know the relationship between what goes on at home and what goes on in school. Students that achieve well often have very strong support at home. Students who do not achieve well in school many times don't have that kind of support at home. This system is going to drive a situation where we need more and stronger support at home. So the question is, how are we going to do that? Here we are now. My major issue for us right now would be this: how can schools provide students that level of improved learning experience which will offset the poor and inadequate home learning support that many students will be able to get? That's the major problem that we're going to have to confront, and we need some very good thinking on that. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, I think we're quite a bit over time right now. I don't know if we have time for questions or not. Andreas, tell me where we are, basically. I unfortunately have to sign off at 3:25. So if you want to take over the questions, feel free. This has been amazing. I would just make one observation from everything I've heard today, which is that if I put two things together, one is a world that where it's flatter than ever. Globalization is wider than ever. It's faster than ever, but there's still so many digital divides, even within the developed countries, let alone in the developing countries. But nevertheless, globalization is wider and faster. The tools of innovation have never been cheaper. They aren't evenly distributed, but they've never been cheaper. And the ability to access computing power through the cloud has never been more distributed. And when I put all of that together and I hear all of the challenges that I've heard today, and when I hear all the innovation that I've heard today, just in a period of basically 3-4 months, I think this is going to be a period of creative destruction around education that will be the equivalent of a meteor hitting the planet or a world war. When I put together the size of the challenge, but also the distribution of the tools of innovation and the access to them, with all of the limitations that still exist, I think we're on the cusp of just an explosion of creative destruction around education, and we will see both of those words come true. We're going to see enormous creativity, and I think a rapid destruction of some of the old systems. But this is going to be a moment. Boy, I hope I live a long life, but I definitely want to see the other side of this coronavirus crisis, because this is going to be an amazing moment, I think, for education globally. And there are going to be huge challenges, but I'm having heard everything I've heard today, I come away enormously optimistic. Andreas, I'm going to turn the show over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I don't think we have much time for a discussion. Let me just offer a few concluding reflections, and I think Cheng will offer also some of hers. I think what I learned from Spain, from Alejandro, is how we can get out of the kind of traditional stakeholder relationships. You know, the lesson from Spain is not just the what, but they have left the rhetoric behind them. They have been able to engage, you know, regions and the federal system to actually work together. They've been able to be creative, to engage the private sector where there is no culture. I think, and they also, I think one of the lessons I take away, you know, we all talk about online learning because that's the technology we as adults are familiar with. You know, for the next generation, it's the mobile phone, it's, you know, other kinds of, and I think Spain has grasped, you know, what is actually the technology of the times and then capitalize on this. I think it's been really great. What I learned from Earl is how to build a, you know, supportive ecosystem. I think what you pointed out really well is, you know, learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires, you know, student well-being, your grab and go drive-through. I think it's an amazing example of not a very difficult idea, but a very powerful one. Your point on social and emotional support for students. I also hope that we're going to take that away from the crisis and look towards a better balance between the cognitive, social, and emotional development of young people, because again, it's those kinds of dimensions that are going to distinguish us from the artificial intelligence in our computers. Franco, Teach for Peru. I think it's an amazing example of how you make education a whole of society enterprise. You know, often when we have private, you know, engagement or civil society engagement, it's seen as an alternative to the public system. And what you've really shown is not public versus private, it's public with private, where you actually engage as, you know, civil society to support and rebuild the public education system. I think it's an amazing example, and I know, you know, Teach for All is many of those kinds of organizations all around the world. I think it's great, you know, that is exactly what we need in those times. And then I was, you know, absolutely fascinated to hear from the young leaders. I think what you show is that there are not, you know, not just very difficult problems, but they're also answers. And these answers don't come from somewhere. They're created at the front line. Yeah, Alice, the point on student motivation and resilience among rural students. You know, there is a lot of hunger for good and better education. I think the question is, how do we create those kinds of pathways? And that's exactly what you are doing. Chris, I think, reminded us, on the one hand, there's a lot of, you know, enthusiasm now to abandon testing and examination. People feel, oh, well, we free education, but I think Chris reminded us of the price for that. The systems may have become, as you put it, test optional, but they're not test blind. You know, those metrics actually still matter for the success of people, and therefore it is important that we get those metrics right and that they get more balance, and that basically we find ways to help students, you know, learn better, teachers teach better in schools to become more effective. And then, you know, Origin and Abdurrahman, actually, EdTech doesn't come from big business. It's actually created by social entrepreneurs, by teachers, by, you know, you are at the heart of this. I really think these are amazing examples for young people taking their future in your own hands. You are just a, you know, small fraction of our audience today, but you're 100% of our future. And actually, I think you show how we can design this. Then looking forward, you know, the example from Orly shows it's actually not that hard to build a great school once you leave your 20th century mindset behind you. You know, I think your advantage is that you didn't start out, you know, from improving what is there, but you started in a way, you know, let's start to think, you know, what we need for today. And I think this is an amazing example for how this can be done. You know, you don't need a, you know, big, you know, infrastructure for this. You don't need a lot of resources. This is actually doable. And I think your idea of, you know, grouping students by autonomy levels and work habit is so obvious. You know, once you start to think about it, why did we ever start with age and grade? Now, these were just, you know, very old-fashioned paradigms of the industrial age. So great work. And then from Siva, I think what I think the IB shows us is that it's not just possible to build great schools individually, but you can build a great school system. Probably, you know, the IB is the biggest civil society project in education in a way. Now, it's grown really from the profession. It's not, you know, a public sector project. It's grown from the ideas around education, and in a way, it's not built for tomorrow. Today, it's actually quite timeless as an education. You know, you've always value to teach fewer things at greater depths. You teach young people ways of thinking rather than superficial content knowledge. And I think again, it shows this can be done. And it's again, a good example. And then Olli Pekka, I think the amazing example of system transformation. The one thing that impresses me always about Finland is not, that it does well on international rankings, but that's only, it has only 5% of performance variation between school. The closest school is always the best school because you're capable of attracting the most talented teachers in the most challenging classrooms. You're really building a culture that helps everyone succeed. And you do that at the individual level. As you said, special needs is not about, 5%, 10% with some problems. It's about the 100%. Every learner has its own difficulties, its own needs, and a good system understands, how different people learn differently, and then to engage with this. And I think, what you also said, trust. I think that's really what enabled systems to adapt and to learn, as you put it. In a way, education systems always evolve at the speed of trust. When you do not have that foundation, it's very, very hard to change anything. And some say, well, teachers in Finland have always had the respect of society. So that's obviously a solid base on which you build reforms, but you have empowered teachers by trusting them. You have created this kind of virtuous circle of productivity and innovative learning environments. I think that's the big and powerful lessons we can learn from this. You see teachers as innovators, not just instructors, deliver, prefabricated knowledge, but they are the designers of your learning environment. And you see professional autonomy and the collaborative culture as one. And it's two sides of the same coin. And I very much agree with this. Now my advice to any policymaker these days in this Corona crisis would be, don't ask yourself how many people support your ideas. Ask yourself how well your people at the front line can collaborate. That's the only way education systems are going to move forward. Thank you.
Andreas, thank you. This has been just an amazing, I don't know how we pulled all this off, but Cheng, thank you so much for all your work in pulling this together. Stefan, John, everybody, this was an enormously stimulating afternoon. I see we kept most of our participants throughout from beginning to end. That's the best compliment you can get on Zoom. Zoom doesn't lie. You can tell who's hanging around and who isn't. So thank everybody. I think this is going to be buffered somewhere, logged somewhere. Andreas, you can tell people who want to access it later, but from me here in Bethesda, I'm going to sign off. Unfortunately, I've got to go to my next webinar, but thank you for giving me the chance to be part of this.
Cheng, your microphone is off. Cheng, your microphone is off. You are muted, Cheng.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank you, everybody, and particularly thank you, Andrews, and John, and Tom, and thank you so much for made this happen. And we have 15 people, and from the 7 nations, and it's the first one, and we just really, without Andrews' design and the Tom's and the moderator and John's support to FWE and the direction, we could not happen. And I also want to thank you, the policymakers from the Spain, from the Finland, and from the United States. My observation is we need more better policymakers. Our education will get better. So, but if we don't have policymakers care about the education, we never solve our problems. And then we need to say, I want to thank you, all of these young leaders. They are the rising star and for education. Olli, you are the very future leaders and you're already doing your business. Chris, you're doing so well in this education and the industry. And also, Diano, you are the future leader and for for our U.S. education and to your district. And I think everyone from this young leader group and from the Ghana, from the Rwanda, and from Peru, and from Switzerland, and everyone here, I just wanted to thank you, all of you. And because education is extremely important. FWE wanted to make us play the important role with you. And we need to wake up the entire world. Pandemic gave us great lesson. We need to care about the disadvantaged children. We need to do lots of things for them. But at the same time, we also need to make sure elite, the education also be changed. We don't want the leaders in the world and to not care about the people's life, not support the public, the health. So we learned a great deal from this pandemic. And at the same time today, I learned a great deal from you and how important and to use television to be as an important tool to helping the students have no access to the internet. So, but I do not say many countries can do, and like Finland and the Spain and other Asian countries have been doing. So we need to promote lots of the work and from what we learned from you. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank you, my team, and thank you and Andrew's support to put Steve and with us, and also Grace and Changyang and David, and also Robin, all of you to make this happen. And thank you so much for all of your work. And we are going to do the webinar in July and also in September. And particularly we focus on the higher education in September, because the higher education is face big challenge. And somebody predicted 4,500 universities may be closed. And because in the 40 years and higher education in our country, United States, the tuition increased 1,400 times. So now we are hitting big problem for higher education, because many high tuition and nobody can pay it. And this so many young people could not afford to continue high education. Then the university has to, they estimate 4,500 university has to close. So we are going to discuss higher education finance in September. And in July, we also have another webinar. We are going to discuss how young leaders play most important role to future education. Thank you very much. And that's it.